Hello internet friends, some thoughts on Starfield since we finally seem to be heading towards a launch. September seems likely at this point, at least all the mandatory delays are out of the way. I don't have any special secrets to reveal, I'm not best friends with Todd Howard, so it's basically just an opinion video based on what we've seen so far of the game. First, I've got to say I've been burned too much by video game companies, promising the world and delivering stripped down, mechanically curtailed, graphically compromised games. Thankfully, there's been less of that than Starfield than there could have been. Todd Howard is notorious for making these grand claims, but I like the fact that Bethesda's got in front of this issue with it being locked to 30 FPS on console. I think that's a good move. Manage expectations. As far as I can tell, the game's 1,000 plus planets. No one's saying that they're going to be all jam-packed with carefully curated quest content. I don't think that's not the message that I'm getting. There will be these wilderness planets and there will be the other ones that are more structured. I do think it's important to manage those expectations, and it's a big part of whether people embrace a game or feel let down by it, and so far they seem to be doing pretty well for me. The moment when people realise, oh, it's just a lot like those other games that you've already made, I don't think that's far away. People will realise that as soon as they start playing, but hopefully by keeping things real they've minimised the shock of that somewhat, which is currently where I'm at with Starfield. It looks like Fallout in space, and I think Todd Howard himself has said that, so I'm not being too reductive in that regard, but it really does feel like that to me. I mentioned in my most recent Fallout 4 video, link to that on screen now and in the description, that Bethesda's creation engine lends all of these games a somewhat dated look, and that certainly seems to be borne out with what I'm seeing of Starfield, which is not to say I dislike the way Starfield looks. I like the design decisions that are being made, something a little bit more realistic than very futuristic space designs, cleaving very closely to a type of technology that we're actually quite familiar with from real-world science and space exploration with NASA and other space agencies. I think is a good move. It grounds the whole thing and lends it a sense of realism. The question is, does it really matter whether the game is at the bleeding edge graphically? Not for me. Graphical sophistication is not at the forefront of my mind when it comes to Bethesda RPGs. It helps if things are pretty, and what I've seen of the world so far, utilising lighting effects, being able to see the various planets in a system from the planet that you're on, tying the world together, that kind of matters more to me. Whether actually when you look up it looks the most graphically real thing you've ever seen is less important than the sense of an expansive universe in this case. It's kind of like when we first saw screenshots of Skyrim, and just on a much grander scale, and that's what you want from Bethesda really, that sense of expansiveness and the opportunity to explore, and they seem to be doing that with Starfield. If the planets in Starfield end up being a single base with a wilderness that feels more like a backyard with mountains around it to hem you in, that's going to be a disappointment. On the other hand, an open world that turns out to be a procedurally generated snooze fest is not what we want either. I don't envy Bethesda in this regard. Few games have married random generation with structured story content in a convincing way. There's usually a massive disconnect between the questing environment, where things feel structured and bespoke, and the moment you stray from that golden mean and enter a world of pseudo-random variables. When I think about the factors that make me excited for a new Bethesda game, it leads me to wonder exactly what am I hoping for in the first place. None of the specific elements are unique. The worlds are large, but there are many expansive worlds in RPG gaming. The systems can be intricate, Morrowind's spellcrafting, Fallout settlements, for instance. There are plenty of games that dive deeper. Some people might point to the lore, but I've never been a lore junkie, so as long as Tamriel feels authentic, that's enough for me. I've never been interested in reading the books or the diary entries in Fallout of the beleaguered vault dwellers and whatnot. So exactly what am I anticipating with a Bethesda game? I think it's a combination of all of the above that make the company's games so compelling. When you've had enough of questing, you can go back to your base or your house and decorate, or go looking for critters in the wilderness, set up traders in Fallout 4, wander one of the cities, stumble across a side quest, and then hunt down a murderer. And after you've done that, you're probably ready for some just random combat. So go to a dungeon, test out your new gear and spells, because it's all one big quest to go from beggar to badass, I suppose. Few games really offer that. When I think about The Witcher, for instance, it's a very similar open world RPG, but certain freedoms at the core of Bethesda games are locked off in that. I am definitely Geralt and I don't have an option. Same with Cyberpunk. In Ubisoft's open world offerings, you're generally a named character as well on a specific path, or the range of things that you can do are a lot more narrow. I'm thinking of something like The Division, where combat is the thing and that's pretty much it. I struggle to think of too many AAA games that offer the same scope. Elden Ring, perhaps, but again, if you want to do much beyond combat, you're kind of stuck. The Zelda games are up there, particularly Tears of the Kingdom with its object manipulation and physics. But I start to think of things like Minecraft for comparisons when I'm thinking about Bethesda games, and at that point you've jumped the genre entirely. You've skipped the tracks to another genre. Of course, a lot of the freedoms that Bethesda games offer only really surface a few years in after the modders have got to grips with things. I really struggle to play Skyrim these days without mods. For instance, less so Fallout 4, since the core systems in that are pretty intricate out of the box, but there's definitely a sense that the main storyline is something you do while the modders are getting to work. The shipbuilding in Starfield looks engaging and intricate, but in 2 years' time I bet those vanilla options seem pretty tame compared to what you can do with mods. To this day, the most fun I've had in a Bethesda game is when I discovered the follower mods for Skyrim that allow you to recruit any NPC into your party. You can control their behavior in detail, what they're wearing, their gear, their voices even, and turn the game from a story about the Dragonborn to a story of this eclectic party of adventurers. It would be absurd to expect those kind of features from the beginning in a game like Starfield. You can see what kind of happens when the developers are trying to add every single feature they can possibly think of. When you look at something like Star Citizen, it's still not out, and I don't think Starfield was out it would be out if they were taking that approach. Much better option is to go for a strong core experience and then over time let the modders get to grips with things, and that's been Bethesda's model for years now. Just how strong that core experience is, that's the question. Will it be riddled with bugs? Almost certainly yes, I would think. If it isn't, it will be the first game of theirs that has launched without strange physics glitches, NPCs demonstrating really absurd behaviors, running on the spot, falling into water, vanishing, teleporting across the screen. I'm not sure why Bethesda games get a pass from players on this. It helps that some of the creation engine bugs are genuinely hilarious, so much so that the devs have kept some of them in, like the fact that you can blind an NPC shopkeeper by putting a pot on his head or any object and steal anything you like. The Giants' famous club hit that rockets the player up into the heavens, that was a bug. That was not supposed to happen. But others less so. I've had quests fail to complete. I've fallen through the world countless times between boulders and had playthroughs become corrupted when the save file has got too big and complex. We can only hope some of the lengthy development of Starfield has been spent squashing those most game-breaking quirks, where you lose time, you lose progress, and you can't continue. That's egregious. That's not funny. So those kind of bugs are the priority, I think. In terms of the main story, I have to say that I'm less than inspired so far. I like the idea of learning who the factions are, learning who the people of the universe are, but the main story seems pretty meh to me. There are some ancient artifacts scattered throughout the galaxy and you have to unravel their secrets. I'm guessing that probably they will lead to a forgotten Stargate system that will allow fast travel to another galaxy or across the existing galaxy in the blink of an eye. And then there'll be a war about who controls that new system of travel. Either that, or in discovering what these artifacts are, you'll wake up an ancient race that's been asleep for millennia and they'll start trying to invade the galaxy. It'll be one of those two things. The complete lack of aliens that I can see, intelligent aliens, other spacefaring races other than humans, is interesting. Please let me know if I've missed it, but I can't see any. Just the wilderness creatures and lower life forms are obviously evolved on different planets, but I can't see any other aliens, certainly none that you could pick as your own starting race. The races of Tamriel are so locked in now and so beloved by people. It's interesting that they would not give you that option unless there's a strong story reason for it, or it's something they're going to add later, keep things human to cut down on costs of creating all these different assets. But there could be numerous reasons, but my feeling is maybe that's something to do with the plot. Now, why have we explored the galaxy as humans and there are no other aliens? But as with any big adventure story, it's the journey, not the destination. I really hope the narrative allows for the idea that we stop off for extended periods to just explore, mine, mess about on random planets. It's always jarring for me when a world-ending or galaxy-ending event, in this case, threat is put in place, but the gameplay encourages you to meander and fart about. It doesn't make any sense. In this situation, I find myself either ignoring the main quest or mainlining the main quest just to get it out of the way, and neither option is ideal. For me, a main quest that starts low-key and ramps up at a certain point, that's the way to go. Morrowind did this better than the later games. It took time to get into that main quest and it gradually emerged how important it was. But you didn't start from the very beginning feeling like, I have to rescue my son, where's my son, run. That would be all consuming. It doesn't make sense that you would stop and help a random group of strangers settle a village and start a new life. You want to find your son. I feel the present received wisdom with video games in writing is that the player needs to feel like the center of the universe from the very beginning, or they won't be interested, and I don't think it's true. For me, starting out small and getting caught up in something is a much better narrative to follow. I enjoy it more, and it reveals who your character is and what the events are as it goes along, and it can be as groundbreaking, it can be as massive an event, eventually world-ending event, but you don't start there, and that accommodates the gameplay better. And Bethesda gameplay is meandering, explore, do what you want, side quests, whatever. On that topic, I do feel like the space setting is a boon. I mentioned before how the quest hubs seem disconnected from the sandbox areas in open world games, but in the case of Starfield, it makes sense that certain planets would be sparsely populated or entirely uninhabited, whilst others would be hives of activity. You could have whole planets that are basically open to the player that they could colonize or potentially terraform, whilst you have these settled regions that are the quest hubs and the centers for trade and commerce. Really, that malleability of the world has only been a factor fully without mods in Fallout 4 so far, but I mentioned in my review, I feel this is the direction Bethesda is going to go in more and more, and I think Starfield would allow for that, much more of that with its setting, and it seems to be doing so from what I've seen. I also theorise that we might see more survival elements in the future in Bethesda games. The rise of survival games kind of happened between Skyrim and Fallout, and it seems like a genre that's ripe for inclusion in open world RPGs more broadly. I could see them playing catch up with the DLC for Skyrim with Half-Fire and the survival mode that they added later, and in my opinion it's all the better for it. Sometimes it's the mods that are the better option for the survival, but I think if it's there from the beginning, having something to think about beyond the location of the next quest giver just it makes for a more interesting time for me. As long as the requirements for staying alive, eating and drinking and sleeping and staying warm, they're not too punishing. It makes me just feel more engaged with the character, connected to them and connected to the world as well. How this might manifest in Starfield is an interesting thing to think about, probably only for me. I can imagine a situation where you have to plan for extended stays in space or on hostile planets, by stocking up with food in your cargo hold maybe, or the amount of oxygen that you're taking into a hostile environment. In reality, you'll probably have the option to do with or without survival, since it can be a turn off for some people. I just hope that it is an option to play survival from the very beginning in this game. There was a survival mode in Fallout at the beginning, but it wasn't fully fleshed out. They added a proper survival mode later. I've never experienced a Bethesda game in that survival-y way from the very start, and I think it would be a fun challenge. There's a difference between returning to an area that you've been before with survival options turned on and going there for the first time not knowing what to expect, because you have to make those choices. You're going into an area that's unexplored. What are you going to need to take with you? Are you going to be able to do it the first time? Because you don't know what's up ahead. And unless the survival option comes with the launch of the game, you don't get that. You're always returning to areas with survival options because they come later. I'd like to do it from the start. I haven't been massively impressed with the combat. It just looks like Fallout 4 combat. Apart from you've got a jetpack and you can boost around a little bit, it looks frighteningly similar. When you look at the kind of guns that are like space handgun, space shotgun, space assault rifle, if you were really hoping for some hugely engaging new kind of combat experience, I think you would look at those graphics be very underwhelmed. It's just I wasn't expecting anything else. It's everything else around the combat. I do like Fallout combat. It's very simple, very straightforward, and it's pretty fast these days. It's kind of point and shoot combat, so it looks okay to me. There was a reveal at the end of one of the latest videos of the possibility of psionic powers of some kind. The character lifts his hand and people start floating around. There's a good chance you're going to be Starfield's version of a Jedi who is destined to save the galaxy, but apart from that, it might add some interesting options in combat. That's the element of that reveal that I'm most interested in. Mix things up a little bit, or things go a little bit Mass Effect-y, Really not sure what to make of the space combat yet. It's quite hard to tell, I feel, with space shooters, in that a lot of how it comes across depends upon how the ship's control, and it's very hard to get a sense of that by just looking at video footage. It looks quite arcadey. For me, it depends on how free it is to move around. We know you can't, the atmospheric flight isn't in there. There's no seamless transition between planet and space. That specifically is not something I miss too much. I've experienced that in No Man's Sky, for instance, and it's kind of interesting the first time you do it, but it becomes pretty standard very quickly. That sense of awe of the seamless travel between as you're going through the atmosphere. I think there are more important things to focus on than that, so I don't mind the fact that it's a loading screen or whatever. There's a difference between ground and space. What other companion options are we going to get? I like the nod in the extended gameplay reveal to the Adoring Fan, classic from Oblivion. It's interesting to see them directly referencing previous Bethesda games, and fan service, I guess, but people who are just deeply into all of the Bethesda games from across their various IPs in this new IP. It's interesting to see. I just know at this stage, whatever those options are, they're going to be so much better 2 years from now, when you can do all kinds of crazy things with the companions via mods. Anyway, I'm cautiously optimistic about Starfield. It's been ages since a new Bethesda game came out, and there won't be another one for quite some time, so I'm really hoping this is a compelling experience. What are your feelings? What you've seen thus far? Are you hyped, or are you tempering your expectations a little like me? I'd love to know. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening. I've been Napyan, and I'll see you next time.